Okay, let's dive straight in today. We're tackling, well, maybe the biggest question. Why are we actually here? I mean, you look around, right? We're all so busy building careers, looking after families, crafting these perfect online images. And yet, even with all that, so many people feel, I don't know, empty. Like something fundamental is missing, that basic why. We've got a whole stack of notes here, excerpts that really dig into this exact feeling.
Absolutely. And that's our mission for this deep dive, really to unpack what these sources say about finding that ultimate purpose. And what's striking right from the start is this idea, maybe our purpose isn't something we just, invent for ourselves. Maybe
Yeah.
it's something we actually receive.
Receive, that's interesting. That shifts things, doesn't it? And we should probably say up front, the viewpoint in these notes is, well, it's rooted in a Christian, a biblical story. The idea here is that purpose isn't just about you or me. It's divinely given, anchored in something much bigger.
Exactly. Which brings us to the absolute core theme running through all this material. We are created for God's glory. Now, the sources are really clear. This isn't about putting on a religious show or trying to flatter God. It's more about rediscovering the fundamental reason we even exist.
Okay, let's unpack glory, though,
Sure.
because that word can sound a bit grand or vague.
Yep.
When these sources talk about God's glory, what do they actually mean? They get into the original languages, right? Like kavod and doxa.
They do, yeah. The Hebrew word kavod, it has this sense of weight, substance, significance, real splendor. And Greek, doxa, that's more about honor, maybe renown. But biblically, as these sources laid out, God's glory is, well, it's the sheer reality of his nature, his beauty, his worth, his character, all of him essentially made visible, put on display.
The fullness of his being, visible. Okay, so if that's God's glory and we're made for it, what's our part? How do we fit in?
Well, it means we're designed to reflect him, to represent him, to sort of make him known to the rest of creation. Think of us as vessels. We're meant to radiate aspects of who he is, his justice, his mercy, his creativity, love, holiness, all these things. It's not about making him more glorious. His glory is already infinite. It's about shining a light on his reality, making it seen.
Okay, this is where it starts to get really personal, isn't it? How does that big idea connect right down to us? The sources put a huge emphasis on this concept, the Imago Dei, being made in God's image.
From Genesis, right?
Exactly. And they frame it not just as a theological point, but as our commissioning, our job description almost. Being in God's image means we're the visible reflections of the invisible God within creation. It's inherently vocational. It calls us to live out his character, his purposes, in how we actually live.
And it's more than just dignity, though that's massive. There's a function, a responsibility tied to it. The sources mention that original mandate: be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, manage it, steward it. Yes, exactly, like co-creators almost, partnering with God to bring forth potential, order, beauty out of the world he made. It's about cultivating, developing.
Right. But the sources don't just leave it there in that ideal state, do they? They tackle what went wrong.
Oh, absolutely. They're very direct about the fracture. Sin, they argue, didn't erase the image, but it twisted it, marred it significantly. Humanity kind of turned inward, started exchanging God's glory for idols, often idols of self.
So instead of reflecting light outwards, we try to absorb it or generate our own. That connects to the danger of self-centeredness they warn about. They use the Tower of Babel story as a key example, don't they?
They do, yeah. Because the stated goal of Babel was, let us make a name for ourselves.
Okay.
It was this collective attempt to build human glory, human renown, instead of reflecting God's. And the sources show how that impulse, that self-exaltation, it inevitably breaks community apart. It works against God's whole design.
This inward turn, this self-focus, the sources call it adrift, right? Like a boat without an anchor. And they trace it back to the fall, Genesis 3. That's the origin point of this disorientation.
Precisely. And when the Imago Dei gets distorted by that self-centeredness, the reflections get warped. So reason can become cunning, manipulative, creativity might turn towards exploitation, relationships become about using people. And the sources make a really strong point here. Pursuing fulfillment only for yourself, even if you have everything the world offers, it often leads straight to emptiness, restlessness, anxiety, isolation, confusion. They point to figures like Saul or Solomon with all his wisdom and wealth, even Judas, people who started with potential but whose self-focus led to ruin.
Wow, that's a sobering picture. But importantly, the story doesn't end there. The fracture wasn't the final word. God's purpose wasn't canceled. It actually set his rescue plan in motion. And right at the center of that plan, according to these sources, is Jesus Christ. They point to him again and again as the perfect image bearer, the fullness of God's glory right here on earth.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Jesus shows us what humanity was meant to look like, the true, undistorted Imago Dei. His whole life, death, resurrection, it wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about revealing the Father and restoring our ability to live out our true calling. Like he said, he glorified the Father by finishing the work given to him. And it's interesting how the sources note he dignified ordinary work by being a carpenter, and he dignified suffering by walking through it, showing God's strength in weakness.
And then flowing from that comes the church, not just a building, but presented as a community. People being reclaimed for God's glory together.
Right. The sources describe the church as this ongoing collective expression of Christ's glory in the world, a community being transformed together into his image. And it's through their shared life, how they love each other, their generosity, their integrity, even how they face hardship together, that they display God's wisdom to the wider world.
Okay, so we've covered the design, the distortion, the restoration through Christ, and the church. But let's make this really practical. For someone listening right now, how do you actually live this way? How do you move from that drift we talked about towards being anchored in this purpose of glorifying God? What do the sources suggest?
Well, they offer some really helpful frameworks. One key touchstone they keep coming back to is from the old Westminster Catechism. Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever.
And to enjoy him forever. That second part. That feels really important. Glorify and enjoy.
Oh, it's absolutely central. The sources really stress that this isn't supposed to be grim duty. Glorifying God is presented as the actual path to deep, lasting joy, a joy that's rooted in God himself, his presence. They cite Psalm 16.11 about fullness of joy in his presence, and it's a dynamic thing. Glorifying him leads to enjoying him, and enjoying him fuels the desire to glorify him more. It's a cycle, which really pushes back against the idea that joy is just something we find by focusing on ourselves, isn't it?
It does. So beyond that core idea, what other practical ways do they suggest for living out this image-bearing purpose day to day?
They break it down into several key areas. First, reorienting your identity. This is about consciously choosing to see yourself primarily as God's image bearer, not defined first by your job or your online profile or what you achieve, but by being created to reflect his character.
So a fundamental shift in where you find your worth.
Exactly. Then, seeing work as worship, whatever you do, paid or unpaid. Seeing it as a place to participate in God's work, to reflect his glory. That means things like excellence, integrity, serving others through your labor. They mention Colossians 3.23, doing it all for the Lord. And they emphasize no job is too small or unimportant to carry that kind of divine weight.
Okay. What else?
Third, approaching relationships differently. Intentionally looking for and honoring the image of God in everyone you meet, even people you find difficult. Loving others as image bearers. The sources call it gritty, embodied, relentless love. It's not just a nice feeling.
Gritty love. I like that.
Yeah. Fourth is navigating suffering. This one's tough, but the sources suggest seeing hardship not just as something to escape, but potentially as a context where God's glory can shine in unique ways.
Right.
It can refine us, make us more like him, and it can show his strength and sufficiency through us to others. How you respond to pain can actually be a powerful testimony.
So not wasting your suffering, in a sense.
In a sense, yes. And finally, embracing your personal calling. Discovering your specific gifts and abilities, and using them not just for yourself, but to make God more visible. Your calling isn't necessarily just your job title. It's about faithfully reflecting God's image right where you are with what you have.
This really does sound like it requires a whole different way of thinking about, well, everything. Success, purpose, daily life. How do the sources say we can actually cultivate that kind of ongoing shift? It seems like it needs intentional effort.
It definitely does. They're very practical here. They suggest things like a daily reflection or alignment check. Basically, taking a moment each day to ask, okay, where did my actions, my thoughts, my words reflect God's character today? Where did I fall short? Where did I maybe get it right? It's like a little inventory. Being honest with yourself.
Like checking your compass.
Exactly. Also, engaging in spiritual disciplines. Things like regular prayer, spending time with Scripture. These are presented as anchors. They root you in truth and help counteract that drift towards self. And community. Connecting with other people who are also trying to live this way. For encouragement, accountability, perspective. The sources really emphasize the church, when it's healthy, as the place where the image of God is expressed most fully through all the members working together.
So not trying to do it alone.
Definitely not. Yeah. They also suggest maybe developing a God-centered mission statement. Just something personal, maybe a sentence or two, based on your gifts and situation, articulating how you want to intentionally reflect God's glory. And finally, and this is crucial, redefining success, consciously letting go of the world's metrics, wealth, status, likes, and focusing instead on faithfulness, love, obedience, making a difference for his kingdom.
That's a big one. Challenging.
It is. And to help picture this, the sources point to some biblical figures, not as perfect examples, but as real people wrestling with this, like David, a man known for worship, focused on God's glory, yet deeply flawed. But his story, especially in the Psalms, shows this constant return, this desire to reorient back to God.
Right, the highs and lows.
Exactly. Then obviously Jesus, he's the ultimate example. His whole life aimed at glorifying the Father through perfect obedience and love. And Paul, someone dramatically changed, whose life became this relentless pursuit of seeing God's glory spread, even through immense hardship.
And seeing those examples, it drives home the point that this isn't just for, like, spiritual superstars or big moments. It's meant for everyday life, even the hard parts.
Precisely. It's woven into the fabric of the ordinary.
So just to wrap this up, we've really dug into this idea from the sources that our deepest purpose isn't self-created, it's received. It's about glorifying God. And maybe counterintuitively for some, this path is presented as the route to true, lasting joy and meaning. It all comes back to who we are, made in God's image. It's a pretty radical alternative to that self-focused drift we talked about.
Oh, absolutely. And understanding you're made in God's image, the Imago Dei, it's actually incredibly freeing. It means you're not just random. You're not replaceable. You have this unique calling to reflect God's character in your own corner of the world, work, family, community, even in your struggles. Living for his glory, as the sources frame it, isn't an extra burden. It's finding alignment. It's liberation into how you were designed to function.
And it requires, as you said, those practical, intentional steps, that daily awareness, rethinking success, using your gifts, doing it with others.
Yes, it really boils down to reflecting his light. There are a couple of powerful lines near the end of our material. You are not made for self-glory. You were created for his glory. And then when we walk in that truth, we don't just reflect light. We become part of the light that will never go out.
Wow. Become part of the light. That leaves us with something profound to think about, and maybe a question for you, the listener, to take away from all this. If your life is meant to be a unique reflection of God's glory, thinking about who you are and where you are right now, what specific aspect of God's character, maybe his patience, his creativity, his justice, his compassion, do you feel he might be calling you to intentionally reflect right here, today?